Hello and welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Those who have followed my channel for a while have probably heard the story about my wilderness years, when I turned my back on board games and decided it was time to be a grown-up. In fact, what I actually did was sell every game and miniature I owned before going to university, where I promptly used all the money to buy beer, which isn't so very grown-up after all. And of course, eventually I realised, after spending all that money, I had nothing left to show for it, except a hangover and a pang of regret in my heart that I had given up so much for so little. In the years since, I have gradually rebuilt the collection I so carelessly abandoned, at no small expense, and I have learned that becoming an adult doesn't necessarily mean growing up. All of this I have discussed at length. But the sad truth is, I never learn, as evidenced by my storied history with Advanced Heroquest. That's a game that has been in and out of my collection numerous times. In fact, I have posted an extensive video charting my experiences with Advanced Heroquest, talking about how I bounced off it as a child, returned to it as an adult, and eventually learned to love it, to the point where it now holds the number 4 slot in my list of top 50 games of all time. You will find a link to that video in the description below. However, Advanced Heroquest isn't the only game I have had a tempestuous relationship with. Which brings me to today's subject, a game that I have previously said wouldn't even make it into my top 50 games of all time based on gameplay, but nevertheless, a game that is incredibly important to me. I am, of course, talking about Warhammer Quest. Now, I'm not going to argue, Warhammer Quest is a classic, and I love it. But I love it more for what it was, rather than what it is. Warhammer Quest is the game that, back then in the 90s, I wanted Advanced Heroquest to be. I had been left perplexed by Advanced Heroquest, but I still wanted something more than Heroquest, something richer that more fully embraced the Warhammer world that I had come to love through countless games of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Warhammer Quest was everything I had hoped for, a huge game that offered endless adventure. Not only was it packed with tiles, miniatures, and a system for creating random adventures with ease for cooperative play, it also offered an extensive role-playing system, an opportunity for someone to take on the role of a dungeon master and spin stories of daring adventure that truly bridged the gap between board game and role-playing game. There was nothing else like it. It was the most generous game I had ever played. Solo, co-op, one versus many, and full role-playing experience. And even though there was a huge variety of enemies in the box, you could expand your game with almost every miniature available from the Citadel Miniatures range. It was exciting, gripping, revolutionary. And I sold it, along with everything else when I went to university. I am sure it would be my greatest regret if I hadn't also sold a full Dwarven army. 100% metal miniatures. Eventually, around 2012-2013, Warhammer Quest came back to me, like a really heavy board game shaped boomerang. Once again, I had a chance to revisit my childhood, to return to a world that had been my sanctuary and shield. But I was revisiting the game as a man in his 30s, not as a child, and perhaps an embittered, more cynical, colder version of me found the game lacking. This is how I reviewed Warhammer Quest in 2014. Warhammer Quest arrived at a time when Games Workshop was going through a garish phase. The artwork was bright and cartoonish and lacked the dark style that made Advanced Heroquest such a compelling proposition. Furthermore, Games Workshop was just hitting its stride for making everything over the top. The massive wings on the dwarf helmets, the barbarians wielding two-handed swords and battle axes simultaneously, the skulls. So many skulls. A lot of the ominous, dark, despairing overtones that were prevalent in the Warhammer world were nowhere to be seen, and instead there was this slightly watered down cartoon style that was at odds with the gritty theme. But while the style may not have been to everyone's tastes, one thing is certain. Warhammer Quest was pretty good fun. It created a vivid world, populated with bizarre creatures and equally bizarre heroes. It created adventure. It also helped to crystallise certain gaming concepts that now seem commonplace, but which at the time were far from the norm. For a start, the game was fully cooperative. This was not a tagged-on cooperative experience like the one seen in Advanced Heroquest. This was actually how Warhammer Quest was designed straight out of the gate. Playing without a dungeon master was completely feasible. Dying horribly, due to the ridiculous amounts of randomness, was also completely feasible. Games Workshop had created a game that presented a series of random events without the need for a dungeon master. It most certainly had not created a game with artificial intelligence. A brave party of adventurers could enter the first room of the first game and get smashed to pieces by 3 rampaging minotaurs. Or the same party could wander empty hallways until accidentally stumbling on their objective without getting so much as a scratch. A random encounter could create a cave-in that brought the game to a premature end, or it could unearth a magical weapon so powerful those 3 minotaurs were nothing more than walking hamburgers. The game was as wild, ridiculous and unpredictable as the world in which it was set. For someone who enjoys a heavy dose of theme in any game, that is absolutely perfect. And absolutely frustrating. Another thing that made the game stand out was the modular board, with individual room and corridor tiles linked with plastic doors. Modular boards were not unique to Warhammer Quest. Advanced Heroquest and Space Hulk are just 2 examples of games that had already done it. But determining which tiles and monsters to place based on random card draws made it all seem fresh and exciting, while the doorways and visually appealing boards made everything pop. But what really made the game stand out was its generosity, the kind of generosity you wouldn't see from any company these days, let alone Games Workshop. It shipped with over 90 incredibly varied miniatures. The doorways were huge chunky bits of plastic that clipped the lavishly illustrated tiles in place, and there were 5 different objective rooms, each with 6 different missions. Combining those different missions with the random dungeon generation system and the random monster allocation meant you could play Warhammer Quest every day of the week without ever seeing the same game twice. Furthermore, you could play it solo, or you could play it with up to 3 other friends as a cooperative game. Get bored of that? Then introduce a dungeon master and flip open the included role-playing book, an epic tome almost 200 pages long, with rules for linking games into a campaign, visiting towns, and leveling up your characters. It even had complete rules for most of the creatures that Games Workshop ever made a miniature for. Back in the day, most of our time in the Warhammer world was spent Warhammer Quest role-playing, and even now I think this may be the best way to play the game because the purely cooperative experience out of the box is so random it can get to the point of farce. Ultimately, the game is nothing more than a string of random encounters and dice rolls. You draw a card to place a room, draw a card to populate the room, roll on charts, roll to attack, roll to determine if you are ambushed, roll to determine how much magic power your wizard has for the turn. You roll, and you roll, and you roll. And 9 times out of 10, you get rolled. But if your heroes beat the odds and survive for a few adventures, they start to power up. They get some good weapons, and they boost their stats. Suddenly, the dungeons seem less dark, the monsters less fierce. At that stage, you aren't exploring dungeons anymore, you are pillaging them. You have to start feeling bad for the monsters. The game flip-flops from one extreme to the other. Balance, after all, was never Games Workshop's primary goal. The aim here is to create stories, to generate wild campfire tales to entertain your friends while you chug mead. This is a game where the journey is more important than the destination, and where the excitement of a dice roll is more important than any deep strategic thinking. This is a game where your elf is down to his last hit point. He is bleeding, desperate, alone. The wizard is already dead. The wizard is always dead. His fresh blood is staining the flagstones in the flickering light of the fallen barbarian's guttering lantern flame. And the dwarf is in a heap of broken chainmail, tangled in his own beard. The enraged minotaur lunges, the elf dances out of range. He notches his arrow, he draws aim. he fires. You roll the dice. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. You may snatch victory from the jaws of a Minotaur, or the Minotaur may be chewing on more than the cud tonight. But it really doesn't matter, because winning doesn't really matter. All that matters is having fun, creating stories, laughing with friends, and rolling dice. This is not a game about winning, this is a game about adventure. This is the game about adventure. But if you can't get into that mindset, if you sit at the table looking for the tactics and strategies that just aren't there, you are going to be disappointed. And if I'm totally honest, if I was sitting down today to play for the first time, I would be disappointed too. So that was me in 2014, appreciating Warhammer Quest for the years of adventure it gave me, but failing to recapture the childlike wonder that had fueled those adventures in the first place. I loved the game, I still love the game, but I didn't enjoy it anymore. A few years after writing this review, I decided it wasn't fair for a copy of Warhammer Quest to be gathering dust on my shelf, so once again I removed it from my collection. Madness perhaps, but I genuinely felt it was the right call at the time. But life is relentless, and I find that with each year that trundles along, I more desperately cling to the things that were important to me as a child. Prized possessions are now books of art from Fighting Fantasy and the Masters of the Universe toy line, and classic games once again shine brightly in the dim corners of my memory. This year marks the 30th anniversary of Warhammer Quest, so naturally the game resurfaced in the bubbling swamp of my brain, and I started thinking, as I so often do, the game was so important to me, it was such a big part of my childhood, I really should have a copy in my collection. And you know, I really wouldn't mind playing it again. It has been over a decade since the last time my barbarian lit his lantern. Well, buckle up. We're about to go dungeon plunging. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.